He's Ben Kercheval. He covers, well, many things for CBS Sports. Unfortunately, the last 2 years he's been assigned to cover spring football. Unfortunately, now for Ben, he will never have to cover a spring football league again. You can follow Ben on Twitter at Ben Kercheval. Ben, in all seriousness, how are you and your family doing while holed up here these recent weeks?
Yeah, we're hanging in there. Appreciate you asking. Thank you.
Did this catch you by surprise, by shock, the events of last Friday?
Yes and no. I mean, I think anytime you cancel your inaugural season 6 weeks into it, you have a global pandemic that absolutely no sport, no individual person is immune to. I don't think you can be completely surprised when it shuts down. Vincent McMahon is many things. He is not greater than this. So, no, not completely shocked at the same time. A month ago seems like a decade now. A month ago when they canceled the season, they seemed pretty optimistic that they would be able to return in 2021. But I was talking to a team source last Friday, one of the people who was laid off by this, and they said, look, we were told 2 years of funding, and I believe that to be true, but there's funding, and then there's funding in a global pandemic, and that changes the thing entirely, and that's what you had here. So certainly a major about-face, a major 180, but I think when you look at it through a bigger lens, I don't think you can look at it and be completely stunned by it.
Ben, how much of this has to do with the fact that the WWE is struggling in the ways that it is? I mean, is this just, he was set to lose a lot of money, but he knew he had the coffers wide open with wrestling. And obviously with the pandemic, wrestling's not making any money. Is this more a result of the WWE or the lack of complete success of the XFL?
It's probably a little bit of both. I would say that certainly the hit that Vince took on the WWE played a massive role in it. I don't think there's any denying that. At the same time, when you look at the future of the XFL standing on its own merit, after 6 weeks, guys, it's an incomplete product. It's not, and it was good, but it's certainly, I don't think, good enough to be able to stand on its own and have a future when you haven't even been able to, complete an entire season. So you look at, the economic future, a lot of uncertainty there. Your future as a league is going to rely heavily in part on, can you renegotiate a new television contract? Well, again, is anyone willing to try to extend this thing? If you don't have a full season under your belt, that's not a lot for people to be able to look at things conclusively and completely and say, okay, yes, this was successful enough that we want to give it another go. I mean, obviously ratings are going to decline over the weeks anyway, but you don't ever have a chance to see if they level off or if they come back up towards the end of the year. So I think it's just many things that are involved in this.
Talk with Ben Kercheval of CBS Sports. Follow him on Twitter at Ben Kercheval. Do you think this is it? I mean, it's difficult to imagine the two entities that have tried this in the last 2 years with much fanfare, using just about every network that carries sports between the two, or at least football, and neither one of them could make it a complete season. I mean, it's difficult for me to imagine, Ben, that you ever have to cover another spring league.
First of all, I liked covering it. I mean, I liked it. I liked it because it was, I like opportunity. I like the entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, I like that part of it. So, I never viewed it as like a real terrible thing, like a burden.
Well, we don't either. We don't either. I was just a flippant comment. That's all. Of your many assignments, one of them has been spring football. My thought is,
I will say this: I'm getting married next year. I definitely don't want to have to cover spring football while I'm planning a wedding. So there is that part of it. So anyway, in all seriousness, look, the AAF shuttered for completely different reasons. That was at the top. I mean, obviously with the XFL, this is a situation that it affected a lot of sports, and no one really could have predicted that it would have been like this. I certainly the XFL is not coming back in 2021. They just filed bankruptcy. The league's up for sale. I know that in his heart of hearts, McMahon wants to try to give this another go at some point down the road where he could have a chance at a full season. But I mean, literally in this case, guys, sometimes the universe just doesn't want you to have spring football.
There is no doubt about that, Ben. This because. Ben, this is the hypothetical that we'll never know, because you brought up the ratings, but the ratings were better than a lot of other television programming out there. The ratings were certainly good enough to get networks to continue to air this. If the TV ratings just stayed pretty flat to where they were in weeks 2 and 3 there, does this league survive long term? Do they get a big enough TV deal? Because Vince did this basically for the next TV deal. Do you think the ratings were good enough to get a TV deal that this league could have one day made money?
Yeah, I think they absolutely would have gotten, a year 2. I think that would have been the real critical time to decide whether you would get like a year 3, year 4. I think they were on track for it, for sure. I mean, that's another just unfortunate part of everything that's happened over the last month and I do think they were on to something great. I mean, again, it's not perfect. The long-term viability is not only about TV ratings, but, how do you get your talent? I think it has to flow up. I don't know that you can just survive forever on spare NFL parts. I think you have to be able to find a way to get kids out of college and come to the league. So there were some things that still would have to happen for that league to succeed, but I think they were bits and pieces that you could absolutely work with.
Ben, I'm somebody that wants spring football and deep down thinks it can work despite all the evidence over the last 20 years to the contrary. But the one conclusion that I've come to recently is if someone's ever going to try this again, they have to do it after the draft. If I remember the original USFL, it was much more of a spring league. I don't believe they kicked off during the winter. I remember really good weather USFL games, even in the Northeast. And to me, March Madness killed the AAF from a rating standpoint, and it was killing the XFL from a rating standpoint. I don't see how a spring league can make it through March Madness, and then you get swallowed up by the NFL draft, and then your season's over. To me, I think it needs to start the weekend of the draft and end July 4th. Does that make sense?
So do you want to compete then with the NBA and the NHL postseason?
Yes. I want to get away. First off, there's enough of an NFL offseason that I think you can just leave the NFL alone from the Super Bowl to the draft. They make enough news, they're fine. The real drought for the football fan is May, June, and July. There's no college, there's no NFL, there's no news. So, feed that hunger, if you will, then, and then say, knock yourselves out, boys, for college and pro. We'll see you after the draft.
The one thing that I would differ on a little bit there is especially, and I would say this is especially true at the XFL. I think the AAF did not tap into this in the way that the XFL did. What you're really banking on with sort of the casual fan, because again, there's no other than PJ Walker guys. Like there wasn't star power in the XFL, right? It's not you will get some diehard football fans, but by and large, what you're banking on is some casual fans kind of joining the fray. And how you get them is through other niches. Gambling was a really big part of their product, fantasy, those types of other things where you can get into the game in various ways. So whether you do that in February through April, where the sport of football is still kind of fresh on everyone's minds, I think if you tap into those other parts, that's really where your success is. Now, whether you have that in February through April or, May through July, or, whatever time of year is, if you're hammering those parts, then I think you probably have a chance. I didn't have a problem with the time slot that they set up, because there was a period where I think like one weekend there was the Lakers versus Celtics game, and I was covering one of the XFL games, and even I wanted to watch Lakers. So even I wanted to switch the channel. So if you're talking about NBA playoffs, I think that's really going to take a large chunk of your eyeballs. This was a period of time where you might have still had a little bit of buffer going on. So I differ slightly on that. That being said, if the spring league is ever going to succeed, you absolutely probably could experiment with a couple of different spots just to see if you can find that sweet spot.
And Ben, finally, what'd you think of the talent? How was the football? And do you think the NFL wants a spring league, or do they want the months of build-up that sometimes less is more?
The talent was okay. Again, it was very little star power. You had P.J. Walker, who, look, for all the fanfare of P.J. Walker, he's getting probably a backup job in Carolina. He I don't even know that P.J. Walker would be good enough to start in the NFL. But you'll have some guys on an individual level who were good enough to play for the Shield, just because they were sort of fringe NFL guys anyway, but for one reason or another, they were never able to really land a starting job. So, the talent was good. I wouldn't qualify it as great necessarily, and I think you could see that in the level of play. As for the NFL, I don't think they care. They're so big and mighty that, a really great example of this actually would be Kenny Robinson. This was the guy who played for the St. Louis Battlehawks. He started. He was the guy who came out of West Virginia early. He would have been eligible for the draft here in about 9 days. And he went and played for the XFL, and he started, and he was a playmaker for them. If you're an NFL team, you're looking at a guy like Kenny Robinson and saying, okay, he's young. He would normally be entering the league right now. And now he's a little bit more of a proven commodity than a lot of guys coming out of college. So even though the XFL would want to stand on its own, there's no way that you would ever stop guys going to the NFL if they're successful in a league like that. So for the NFL, I actually qualify a little bit as not insurance, but I think there's a little bit of okay, now we have a little bit more tape on a guy that we otherwise wouldn't have maybe drafted or looked at.
Ben, congratulations on your engagement. Be safe, be well, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
All right, thank you guys. Take care now. Ben
Kercheval covered the XFL for CBS Sports. Follow Ben on Twitter at Ben Kercheval, Kercheval. Ben Kercheval, kind enough to join us once again here on Miller and Moulton. Mark, do you see a spring league in the next 5 years?
No, I don't.
I don't either.
I don't. Look, unless the NFL wants one. The only league that's out there as a minor league that has a possibility of working has to be owned by the National Football League. It is the only chance that this has. Has anybody not figured this out yet? And the other thing, see, here's the part of it. Why does baseball's minor league work? They flip the bill for all the players. Let people, if you want to let someone own the Scranton Wilkes-Barre Steelers, and they're a combination of Philly and Pittsburgh's farm club, but the players are all provided by Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, then that can work. I don't see how, and I've said this from the beginning, every one of these leagues focuses on football coaches, that they overpay. They think this is the NFL, and they pay these guys 6 figures to run a league of a bunch of guys no one's ever heard of. It's laughable. Their business model sucks. They've never had a clue how to run a minor league sport. It's why I gave Vince credit, and Vince was working in some spots because he went and put in infrastructure. He put in ticket sales departments. Vince was the guy that had a shot at making this work because nobody knows how to promote better than Vince McMahon. And
he had the deep pockets, and he had the network affiliations, and it was all a matter of, before COVID, it was going to be a 2-year rollout, And then he was hoping to get ESPN and Fox or anybody else who wanted to get in the bidding because he wanted to bid to televise our games. And that's how we were going to be, solvent. But obviously didn't get to that point because they weren't getting any money from ESPN and Fox to run these games. And it was interesting because there were some markets, just like the AAF was working in a big way in Orlando and in San Antonio. The XFL had markets like St. Louis in which they were getting 30,000 people at their games. You're like, man, this could work. And, yeah, I don't see one in the next decade, to be honest with you. I don't see one before the 2030s. And you're right, Mark. I think if it happens, it's going to happen with the NFL somehow involved. Ben Kercheval joining us here on Miller and Moulton.